Hey y'all! Well, we've finished up our little preamp shootout, at least for the time being, and the next thing on our list, on the poll that I put, is y'all wanted to see some DIY speakers, and we're going to be building one of these. This is I think it's called a Desktop Mini by GR Research, and it comes as a flat pack that you glue up, build the crossover, and then put the drivers in it. Fairly simple to build project. See, we got different tools out today. We got clamps and wood glue, and we're gonna kind of shift off in a little different direction on our normal fabrication stuff. And I think this is gonna be a fun project. I've also got another pair of slightly larger DIY speakers that are more like about this tall, and I think it's got 2 main drivers and then a tweeter. So that'll be a fun kind of side project to do as part of this. And then at the end of this, I want to compare this to 2 different clip speakers that I have that are around the same price point. One was a earlier Clips Icon, and then I can't remember the model number of this other one that I just got that really sounds nice. And so it'll be interesting to compare these 4 speakers that are kind of around the same price point and see how they compare to each other. So let's get to putting this thing together. Okay, so we're going to dive into putting these speaker cabinets together. And this is pretty much how all these flat packs type MDF speaker cabinets would be built. And so we're just going to go over a few of the things that you need to have handy. You want to have some kind of napkins, paper towels, something like that. An old rag that's damp for cleaning off the glue. Have some type of wood glue. I'm using this Tight Bond, but Elmer's, just any of those kind of wood glues should work fine. And then I saw online, a guy was saying to use some construction adhesive on this one center peg. And so we're going to follow their instructions. And then you're going to need some clamps. And these aren't like super, super nice ones, but they're not really crappy ones either. I got them from the local hardware store. And just these bar clamps will work fine. If you've got a friend who's a woodworker, you could probably just borrow a few from him instead of having to buy them. You're going to need at least 4. And I'm going to show you how I did it with 4 clamps. You could use more and maybe assemble more of it at the same time, but we're going to do it with 4 clamps. So the first thing you want to do is basically kind of lay out how you're going to be assembling this thing and make sure all the pieces fit right, which they likely are going to fit really nice. And we have 4 sides. It's going to look like this when we're all done. And then this one dowel pin goes like in the middle here. Make sure it fits and isn't too long. It's nice. Everything's a nice tight fit. And that dowel kind of helps keep things square. Then the last thing you want to do is make sure that the top and the bottom fit, which seem to fit fine. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start gluing this thing together. And you want to put glue on both sides of each piece. I did learn on this dowel pin, don't put any glue here, because you don't want to have adhesive between the bottom of this hole in this peg, because you might not be able to get the sides to squeeze in together. So just put glue on the outside of this pin when you stick it in this hole. So we're gonna start with our construction adhesive. But before I apply this, I want to go ahead and preset the clamps to about the size that they need to be. And again, this little peg seems to really help kind of keep things squared up, because at least on this kit it fits really snug. And we want to make sure that you don't put any of the pieces on like upside down either. So we want it like this. And so let's go ahead and kind of preset these bar clamps to the length we're going to be setting them to. Have these part way screwed in so you got plenty of room to tighten them up. And go ahead and get all 4 bar clamps kind of preset to the approximate length. So when we get ready to, when we get glue on everything, you'll be all ready to put these clamps in place. And then we'll put our clamps over here. And like I said, the first piece I'm going to do is I'm going to glue. I'm going to put some construction adhesive on the outside of this piece and put it into each one of these holes. So and this is some pretty nasty, stinky stuff, so and just put some, you don't need a lot because it's a pretty tight fit down in that hole. Like I said, the first one I built, I got some of this glue on the end, or I think I put it down in the hole and it shoved it down, and then I couldn't get the sides to push together because it was basically like kind of hydraulicing the adhesive down in the bottom of the hole. So put these 2 together first, just like that. Now, I've seen a guy online building these, and he just put the glue on one surface, but the instructions say to put it on both. And you don't want to put just a crap ton of the stuff, because you don't want it like just squeezing out like crazy. There's no point in making just a giant mess with it. And I've seen people use a little brush to kind of brush this on, but I just use my finger. And unlike the construction adhesive, this stuff is thin enough where you don't have to worry about it like creating some kind of hydraulic thing where you can't push the pieces together. And I feel like the main glue joint is going to be this long one. This one on the side, not that one down there. So make sure you get a lot of glue. I just put the glue on this one side like this. And I mean, if you get a little extra and it squeezes out, you want to make sure you get enough. If you don't see any squeeze out, you probably didn't put enough glue on. And this is where your little rag comes in handy. So you probably want to spread these apart just a little bit, so you can slip this piece down in. because you don't want it scraping all the glue off while you're inserting it between these two side pieces. And I think we're going to have nice squeeze out there. Go ahead and I usually do an initial just kind of push it together so we can set it down on its back. And come in here. And butter up this end here. And that's one thing about MDF is it really works well with glue. You might be thinking, well, should I be putting some little brads or some screws? Or you don't need to do any of that. MDF just glues like crazy. So again, make sure you're putting the right side out as you're assembling this. And it does help if you have a nice, shouldn't have done that. Helps if you have a nice solid flat surface to work on here, because that'll help align everything as you're doing the final clamp together. So we want the binding post cup on the bottom and the woofer on the bottom. And we're going to spread this apart just a little bit. Get that in place. Now at this point I would stand it up so you can get the surfaces even. This. And wipe off your first little excess here of squeeze out. And then we come in with our clamps. And like I said, I feel like the main, as long as you can feel that this is fairly flush, or, you know, push that in so you feel just a little lip there, you're good. Go ahead and snug that clamp down. And the same way in the bottom, push that in till you can feel it's in just a little bit, because the main clamp we want is in this direction, because those are the largest glue surfaces. And then again, feel that. Make sure that those are, you know, pretty even. You don't want a lot of overlap there. Maybe if you need to, you can loosen those up a little bit and kind of smack those. Sure, we get that pushed in. And then wipe our glue joint. It's gonna look like that. Like I said, come in here and wipe that glue joint. Make sure those are flush. Make sure you can feel that that's flush. And we're good. So now let's get this back edge done. Push it in. And this glue's got a fairly decent window of time on when it starts setting up. You don't have to like be in a panic. But you don't want to mess around either. These things are machined really precision. So everything should fit nice and tight. You don't want to come back and have like weird gaps that you're having to deal with. Okay. And then this is going to be really tight, but it fits. So we know that's good. And we know it's square. And like I said, these things are made, they're cut so precision that especially once you put that dowel in the middle, they pretty much are gonna be square. And if you have to come back once this dries, I mean, if there's a little tiny step on one end, if you have to come back with a little sandpaper to flatten that out, that's not the end of the world. And then, if you can see, like there's not a lot of glue coming off on the inside either, but there's a little bit. So we know we've got a little bit of squeeze out. Then you can come in with your finger and just kind of wipe that off. And honestly, that's the hardest part of doing this, is this first kind of glue setup. Now, if you have extra clamps, if you had two more, you could come in and push it this direction, but I just don't really think you need to. This fat joint here is really the one that's going to give it all the strength, and the one that needs to be clamped. And then just do one last little check to make sure that these surfaces are flush, and snug your clamps down. Those joints are ready to dry. So we'll be back in a little bit to glue the top and bottom on. Okay, so we've given this thing about 6 hours to dry, and I mean, you could give it overnight, but I think 6 hours is plenty of time. Actually, it's been more like 8 hours, so glue's definitely set. We can take our clamps off, put them aside for now. Now, one thing you do want to make sure when you're clamping this up is that you can feel that these edges are sticking up slightly higher than the face of this, because we're going to come back with a router and route these off. But we've got a nice edges. And again, this is sticking up just slightly above this, or at the very least you want it level, but sticking slightly up is good. And then came back with a basic little paint paddle, put some sandpaper around it, and sand this down until this is, really close to being flat. Because you might have a little bit of a lip here, and you want this as flat as you can get it. So we want to come in here now and clean off, get all this little bit of dust that might be on here off. And the next thing we want to do, and I made this mistake on my first one and it didn't do this, you want to go ahead and assemble the crossover. And I'll link in the description, there's a good video on assembling this crossover. And the reason you want to go ahead and assemble this is, so you want to figure out where these holes are, where the mounting screws are going to hold this down to the bottom of the speaker. And go ahead and get these pilot holes drilled. so that when you get the speaker done and you stick the crossover into the speaker, you'll be able to easily get these screws started and screw this down into the bottom of the speaker cabinet. And I'm going to put it where these two are going to the cup on the back of the speaker. And so I want to make this the back. So the next thing we're going to do is glue up around here and put this in the bottom of the speaker. And just like we did and I've already test fit this, and this does fit in place quite snugly, but it does slip right on. So make sure this fits before you put your glue on. And then this is going to go on the bottom. And like I was saying in the last segment, the instructions I saw on this, the guy only put the glue on one surface, but I feel like the instructions and everything else I've learned from woodworking is you want to put it on both. So, feels like you got a little excess, you can wipe some of the excess onto your other surface. And this MDF just really soaks up the glue. And the main place you want to make sure you get good coverage is this big flat surface. And then just put a little of your excess down here on the inside. That's not as important as getting this big flat surface fully glue contact. And there we go. And this is going to go. Make sure you get all 4 edges started. And then wipe off and again we have probably 5 minutes of working time before we need to get clamps on this. So flip this over, and on this one there's no front or back, and I'm going to be using a router to round off all the edges because I think it looks really cool. But a lot of people don't have a router. You don't have to have a router. You can come back with sandpaper and sand all the edges smooth. And if you need to, you can use a little wood filler to fill up any gaps. So having a router isn't necessary to build these, but you'll have just a square, sharp edge speaker unless you want to try sanding the edges round, and that would probably be pretty difficult to do and have them come out very even looking. I wouldn't really recommend doing that, but you can try if you would like to do that. And again, if you have a woodworking friend that you're borrowing your clamps from, they probably have a router that they'll let you borrow for doing this one project. Because a router is not a real inexpensive tool to purchase just for doing, if you're doing one pair of these speakers, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. And then I have found that if if you're having trouble getting it to fit in one direction, sometimes turning it around, it'll slip down in easier. There it goes. And it's a tight fit, so don't be shocked if it's a little tough to get it to go down in there. I go ahead and wipe off my excess before I get my clamps out. And you want to clamp pretty close to this edge. You don't want to clamp too far down. You can see it's just pushing that glue out, which is what you want to see. It does seem to help to kind of do one, put one clamp in one direction and one in the other. That. And wipe that glue off. The guys that are really good at this, you don't see much glue at all squeeze out when they're tightening up the clamps, but it's better to have a little too much squeeze out, but not enough. And then we want to flip it over. You can see we've got a gap here now. And we just close that up. If you had a couple of more clamps, you could put them like on the front and the back. But I think 4 clamps will hold this thing together just fine. This is definitely where you want to come in and clean off as much of this glue as you can before it sets up. Stick your finger in the woofer hole and clean up any real excess on the inside, which I'm not seeing a whole lot squeezing out on the inside, which is good. Just a little tiny bit. And there we go. Get the both ends glued on now. And I'm going to go get a little bit of water on my rag. You can come back with a damp rag and get a little more of the glue off that's squirted out. Because any excess you've got left on here, you'll probably end up having to sand off. And then once this dries, these are going to be some really solid little boxes to make these speakers out of. And there we go. Just got to let these things now sit and dry for, going to go ahead and let them dry overnight. And then we can start working on doing the router and sanding work on them tomorrow, getting them prepped up to paint. So we'll be back tomorrow. Well, I think we got a lot done today. Got this all glued up, clamped up. Need to let this thing sit overnight and let this glue all cure good. And then we're going to come back with our router and dress up the edges, then do a nice sanding job on it, and then spray paint this thing with some textured black paint, which I think looked really cool on the other speaker. Might have to do a little bit of filling with some plastic wood and stuff, but we'll get into that in the next episode. I will warn you that this MDF, do not sand it or route it or whatever kind of stuff you're going to do inside your house. I made the mistake on the first one because the weather was kind of bad of doing the router stuff and everything down in my downstairs workshop. Man, that dust got everywhere. I thought sheetrock mud sanding was bad. This stuff is horrible. And I was wearing a mask and, not supposed to breathe the dust from this stuff either, but it was a mess. So we're going to be doing the second speaker box and any future ones outside so that none of that dust and sanding stuff from this MDF gets inside the house. So I just wanted to give you all a warning about that. If you are working on one of these projects and getting ready to jump ahead, like some of y'all seem to love doing, yeah, don't do it inside. Don't make that mistake. Learn from my mistake. Don't wreck the inside of your house with that dust. So anyway, I hope you're enjoying this little DIY speaker series, a little venture off from our normal tube amp stuff. If you're enjoying the channel, please subscribe. Please like the video, and we'll see you soon for more speaker DIY fun. Have a great day.